Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Welcome back to the ITBR Rewatches Queer as Folk, Episode 4. Just a reminder before I introduce my exciting guest here today. Episode 3, if you haven't listened to it, it's out. That was called No Bris, No Shirt, No Service. And episode 4 is called Ted's Not Dead. It aired on December 2000 in the United States, um, and was written by Richard Kramer and directed by Kevin Inch. So I'll read the synopsis when my guest joins me. But I'm so excited because my guest here is someone who I've always looked to on social media, Joe Nasta, who is a queer writer, who I've learned is a mariner, um, who's based in Seattle, Washington. And I know that Joe's going to open up regarding the work um, that I think your pronouns, we should get into it just because I'm even thinking, Joe, how do I, use the correct pronouns? But Joe's pronouns are Z and Zer. So would it be their work that you do?
Yeah, Zerwork. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm reframing my mind here. Um, but what work are you currently doing? Because I know you're working in an exciting zine environment.
Yeah. So I curate a zine. It's just a digital zine. It's called Stone Pacific, stonepacificzine.com. We just seek to highlight unconventional artists and writers, um, sometimes with ties to the Pacific Northwest, but also from all over the world, and just give um, space for people to feature their work, writing and different types of art. So it's cool.
Yeah. Well, and Joe has an MFA, or
No, I
you
don't.
started your MFA.
Yeah, I started my MFA, but I dropped out.
Okay. Well, you know, you dabbled in an MFA in creative writing and poetics, but Joe always is publishing poetry. Um, And if you want to plug your Instagram, now's a good time because so many of your poems are always featured on your Instagram. But um, Joe's work has been published in the Rumpus, Yes Poetry, Pigeonholes, um, yeah, all over the place. So I think your Instagram is what? At
It's Rafflecopter McGee.
Okay. So ROFLCOPTER Mickey. Okay, so Rafflecopter Mickey.
Yeah.
Joe, welcome. I'm so excited to have a poetic mind. Every guest here has always been so different in Queer as Folk. So, you know, my I've had mostly queer men, but I'm expanding it to the queer like community in general. I might have a straight ally join eventually, which will be an interesting experience. Um, but first, if you could just like explain your pronouns because I've heard of Z and Zer. I don't really know a lot about it. Like how did that enter into your world and like how you identify?
Yeah. So I identify as agender. Um, so I just kind of settled on some pronouns that were more unconventional and didn't really immediately signify a gender. I mean, I present really masculine and like day-to-day life, most people would just assume that I use he, him pronouns, which I don't really like give anyone a hard time, especially because most people aren't that familiar with like Caesar. So it's like it's not that big a deal, but um yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's so interesting and um a good chance of just opening up about like what we get in episode 4. So let me read the synopsis. So I always say everyone's task here. I have all these notes for episode 4. Not that every other guest didn't have an exciting episode to cover, but we have a whammy and a doozy. Like I feel that episode 4 is the ultimate climax. Like we're really gearing up for a lot in this plot points that
Mhm.
happen in this episode. But okay, so Ted's not dead, which I think is just an interesting title for the episode.
Mhm.
because I feel like there's so much more going on than just that title. So it says while Ted lies in a drug-induced coma, Brian learns he's named the executor of his friend's living will. Also, Justin's mother suspects the truth about about her son's sexuality. And Michael and Emmett try to remove incriminating evidence from Ted's apartment, but discover Ted's longtime crush on Michael. Okay, so that's our like artificial intelligence, you know, basic summary, but there's so much that that summary doesn't even cover. So I always ask every guest, Joe, when did you first discover the 2000 Queer as Folk?
So I watched it, I think in like 2012,
Okay.
which is when I was in college. So I was at the Merchant Marine Academy watching
Yeah,
Queer.
shout out to Long
Yeah,
Island.
I was in my room just watching binge watching Queer as Folk. I honestly didn't even remember that much. I've been rewatching it and I'm like, dang, like I watched all this. I have no memory. So it's been exciting to revisit it. Especially because I was younger then. I was 18 and now I'm 29. So you definitely have a different perspective like 9 or 10 years later to look back on something like that. So
Yeah. Well, and I'm just curious, what was it like you actually um looking at such erotic queer material at the Merchant Marine Academy? Like, were you nervous that you were watching it with all, I mean, is it still the Merchant Marine Academy? Is it still all men, male identifying people, or is it
no, so there's women.
okay?
I think there's been female midshipmen since like the 70s.
Okay.
So it's not all men, but I mean I had male roommates, obviously, which most people are pretty cool and don't really care what anyone else is doing. I did have like one roommate who like really was homophobic, and would be pretty vocal about it with people. But for the most part, no, like everyone is really nice. And when I was there, like all the service academies were setting up like spectrum clubs. So like sort of like a gay advocacy group
Oh,
for
wow.
for queer midshipmen and cadets to go to. And they even like sent us to the Outserve SLDN gay military conference when it was in Disney World. So it was like a pretty it there were a lot of efforts made to support queer students. And of course, like kids are going to be kids, so like if people are going to be rude or homophobic or whatever, that's something that everyone has to deal with no matter where you are. But like as an institution, it's not necessarily the worst. It's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and do you find that there's always the stereotype about the Navy being such a homoerotic place? I mean, it sounds like what you're saying. The Marines are pretty, I mean, I feel like most military branches, from what I've heard from those who've served, I mean, did you serve, Joe?
No. So the Merchant Marine is different than the Marines. So
Okay.
it's more affiliated with the Navy. So basically, I became a marine engineer. So I worked on like container ships, cruise ships,
Oh,
and I
wow.
did most of my career on a research vessel. And then I was in the Navy Reserve. So I never did any like active duty time.
Okay. So I didn't know that the Merchant Marine then has this affiliation with the Navy.
Yeah, so there's like a special part of the Navy Reserve that is all. It's called the Strategic Sea Lift Officer Program.
Okay, yeah. So these are pretty brainy, whiz-like um students at the Merchant Marine Academy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a rigorous course of study. Like you go to sea for a full year broken up and you fit like a 4 or 5 year curriculum into essentially 3 years on campus. So it's a pretty intense
Yeah.
environment.
But it makes sense why it's on the Long Island Sound. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Because I think there's also in the Bronx, in
Yeah,
Throgsneck. I thought
so
there was
SUNY
also an
Maritime.
academy.
Yeah,
The
SUNY Maritime.
Maritime.
That's the state
Yeah.
school. So we're right across the water from them. They're like right under the Throgs Neck Bridge. So from Kings Point, you can see the Throgs Neck and you can see SUNY Maritime. There's a little bit of a classic rivalry there, a little.
Yeah, a very nuanced rivalry that people
Yeah.
who aren't in the in group don't know about.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like such a specialized world. But no, thank you for all that. Okay, so Joe was watching this in 2012 in your bedroom. And then how long has it been since you actually returned to it? Not until you're here now on the podcast.
Yeah, I just started rewatching it like last month. So that's the first time I've really dived back in.
Okay, so it's been 11 years. Um, okay, so we'll go through, you know, and I'm sure all of your poetic magic and voice and mariner voice will come through in this episode, but we go right away into um like Michael, they're all at the diner and where his mom Debbie works, and they're all talking about their hookups from Saturday night. And I mean, what did you think about? I always just find it so interesting, like the group of men, Michael, Brian, and Emmett. They tend to be our Greek chorus. Like they're always just like setting the scene every episode at the beginning. And it's like Michael had a guy with beach parasites, which just sounded awful. I'm
Yeah.
like there's parasites in his anus. Like I don't really, it was making me squirm. And I'm not sure um why that guy even wanted to hook up with Michael if he had parasites inside him.
It almost sounds unreal. What I find about so many scenarios in this show is that like they all, especially early on, like because this is still so early, episode 4,
Mhm.
uh, like we're still getting to know the characters and getting to know this world that they live inside, and we just are presented like nonstop with so many like fantasy based, almost unbelievable scenarios. And like that's kind of what I got from this diner scene. Like they're looking back on their weekend, they're like regrouping and they're like, oh, look at this like absurd situation I was in. I was in a dungeon with an undertaker. I was with the perfect man, and then it turns out that he wasn't so perfect after all. And it's just like it just like really quick bursts of that right to begin the episode. And then it's like Debbie comes and is like, shouldn't you guys be at the hospital? It's like, damn, right back to reality. So it's like right
Yeah.
away, this juxtaposition of like the fantasy and the reality of this
You're
queer world.
right. Yeah, no, no, that's such a good point, Joe, because we really are like between the utopic world of like queer male sex all the time, and then no, this is actually their reality. I mean, Brian is the one who has the most realistic scenario. He was hooking up with Justin again. And right, we get another photo, or not photo, we get another shot of Harold's beautiful butt.
Mhm.
Um, and he's with Justin, but of course, the most realistic scenario isn't even discussed. Like, why do you think he's so unwilling to talk about how many times he's been with Justin?
I think we'll get some more hints about that later in the episode because it has a lot to do with Brian's self-identity and
Hmm.
also like the difference between what he wants and what other people want from him and what he's able to give. And he's kind of like having this crisis, um, which I think it comes down to his self-identity, and he doesn't want to deal with that and that crisis that he's having. So he just kind of ignores it.
Yeah, no, I agree. So okay. That's basically all we get at the beginning. I mean, I do love that Emmett's hookup. There's like a leather play happening, but then like the most, like you said, to even just shock the viewer. I think like you're saying, they're really just trying to do a shock value at the beginning. Like it's not the BDSM culture that's shocking, like the leather culture, which a lot of viewers, especially if they're straight, would like that would be so enticing to them. It's like, oh no, he's an undertaker. Like he's a
Mhm.
funeral director or
Mhm.
has some element in that world. It's like, no, not that he is about to do bondage with a couple in the morning. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, those scenarios are always so fascinating. Um, okay, so then we like get thrown back into a hospital. Like you said, we're in reality. And I found the scene with Margaret Schmidt, Ted's mother, to
Mhm.
be a really well done, layered discussion, I thought. Like it really was giving us a lot of humanity in her character and her relationship with her son. You know, what did you think when she's introduced to her son's like gay male friend group?
It was interesting because it was like she knew that there were these elements to Ted's life, but she never had to personally confront it or interact with it in any way. Which it kind of one thing that she said, loving someone's not the same as knowing them. Like
Mm.
she kind of has to deal with that in so many ways, which is really intense.
And did you agree with her? I thought one of the most heart or gut-wrenching moments is when she turns to Michael and says, like, if my son was straight, um, would a woman have left him in this drug-induced coma state? Like, and not have called the ambulance. You
Mhm.
know, did you like because I can really understand where she's coming from. It's because it didn't read to me as homophobic. It was more like men are not looking out for other men, is what I thought she was implying. Um, in this sexual attitude she has. I mean, what did you think was going on with her framing of that?
I mean, I thought it was interesting because I've watched ahead, so I know some things that aren't revealed in this episode. So I think it's interesting that that's her assumption that he
Mhm.
was just left. Um, and I also think it's interesting that that's what the viewer is led to believe, that
Mm.
Ted was just left for dead. And that it's kind of like this supposedly this supposed drug addicted character that we don't know that much about yet, who all we know is had this encounter and then supposedly left Ted for dead. Because it seems like it's not only just dumping on men, it's like specifically portraying an archetype of this like negligent drug addict who
Mm.
would do this horrible thing. And that's what is set up for us in this episode. So it's kind of intense because that's an assumption that a lot of people have about the queer world or about the
Hmm.
gay world in specific, that like it's all about partying, it's all about drug use, it's all about seeking pleasure. And then the consequences of that are just ignored. And that's an assumption that a lot of viewers maybe would bring to the table, just like Ted's mom did.
Well, and just like me, where we connect so much, Joe, is this is why everyone needs to follow your Instagram. Joe, like myself, we love to film ourselves in nature, reading evocatively. I mean, Joe's mostly reading, you know, um, Z Zone poetry. See, I got it, Joe. Um, reading like poetry you've actually written. I like to read, well, you also read other poems that have been published. That's not true. Um, and I like to read poetry in the wild and literature. And I feel that we are really emotively connected. Um, but I guess I don't know why it's bothering me in this episode, or maybe it's that stereotype, like you've said, not only about drugs, but I feel like there's a statement here about men not being in touch with feelings like
Mhm.
that connects to Brian. I feel like men and their feelings is the theme in this episode. Like men and their feelings and coming out. Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host and director of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I hope you're enjoying what you're watching on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So to watch the rest of the episode, head to our Patreon. It is patreon.com slash Ivory Tower Boiler Room. That's Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And you can watch the rest of the episode on our $5 a month membership called ITBR Student, or join the ITBR Professor membership. It's only $10 a month. You get access to all of our videos. You get access to both of our book clubs, the Ivory Tower Boiler Room and the True Crime and Academia book club. Plus, you unlock all of our other episodes. So at the ITBR Student, you only get access to our weekly interviews and the True Crime and Academia episodes. For $10 a month, you get access to our ITBR rewatches, our Teaches series, and True Crime and Academia rewatches and Teaches series, plus the book clubs. Okay, can't wait to see you all on Patreon. And just a reminder, I also offer consultation services. It is $30 for your initial consultation. You get a 1 hour private Zoom with me, and I will help you whether you want to create your own podcast and or media brand, you want to navigate academia as an undergrad or grad student, you need help with technology as it relates to teaching or media, do you want to expand your social media presence as an artist, writer, podcaster, or academic, or even crafting your public humanities identity, I will help you with my consultation services. You can also find that on Patreon as well. Okay. Thank you all for watching and for supporting the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Bye.